make an observation on that.
Well, brother, you proffered it as the third reason why brothers abused. Now, as council's put to you, we all understand there was a change in East and Western society in relation to many aspects of sexuality and sexual activity between consenting adults. You understand?
Yes.
Now, what's being put to you is how could it ever be said that those changes caused or justified brothers sexually abusing, including raping children? How could that ever be a consequence of a change in adult sexual attitudes?
I couldn't agree that sexual offences against children can ever be justified.
But how could it be that a change in Western culture, as council puts it, the sexual revolution, caused priests or brothers to abuse, including rape, children?
The abusing and the raping of children can never be justified. Various, perhaps, explanations as to why it may have occurred can be presented.
So the sexual revolution caused this to happen?
I wouldn't say that it caused it. I'd be inclined to say that it might have contributed to creating a climate in which such things may have become possible.
How could it do that?
Society became, as I remember it, much more relaxed about matters of sexuality.
But society never became relaxed about raping children, did it?
I doubt it. I hope not.
Well, it never became relaxed about sexual assault of children, did it?
No.
While I'm talking to you, you said that there was inadequate psychosexual development of the Christian brothers.
I offer that as a possible contributory factor.
Do you consider that your own psychosexual development was poorly developed?
I would have had to mature myself, and I would hope that I did so successfully, maybe despite the deficiencies of the formation that was offered to me.
Well, then, for those who didn't achieve that, where does it break down? What happens to your observation?
I think that one would have to consider the whole changes that were occurring at this time in the religious life and in the philosophy that was underpinning the living of religious life. When I began, the whole of the spirituality was based upon the notion that, I suppose it was called the philosophy of dualism, that the body was at least potentially evil and needed to be constrained. As a young religious, as in my era, we were formed in the notion that the world, as we called it, was at least potentially evil, and as a result we were secluded from it. We were separated from it. Following Vatican II, as I have understood things, that notion was dispelled, and God revealed himself in all his beauty through humanity, and that subsequently would have had an effect upon the kind of formation that religious were given pertaining to the way they related to the world and to other people. At the same time, as you have referred to, society was changing its attitude towards sexual relations. In that mix, young religious could easily be confused and find it difficult to see clearly how they were to relate to others.
I still have trouble understanding why these changes result in priests committing crimes, including the most extreme crimes against children.
Human nature being what it is, I don't think I can say anything more than I have.
You, of course, were the superior in the Ballarat community for many years, weren't you?
Nearly 6 years, yes.
Sorry?
Nearly 6 years.
And during that time, you now know some of the brothers were offending, don't you?
I know now, yes.
Do you accept any responsibility for the failures inside the organisation of which you were the superior?
I do regret enormously the horrible things that were done, and in my regret, I profoundly wish that I had have been better informed and had more complete knowledge of what was occurring. That's my deep regret. I'm appalled at what happened, and I am deeply sorry for the pain that people have suffered as a result of that.
But do you accept any responsibility?
I think I would have to the extent that if I had known what was going on, and if I then failed to take appropriate action, then I would be fully responsible for the consequences. I take responsibility for any failure to the extent that I did know what was happening.
Brother Nangle, the fourth of the matters that you identified just before lunch as contributing to this occurring was that it was totally inconceivable to you, in effect, that your fellow brothers would have been engaging in activities of this kind. Is that right?
Yes.
By 1973 at least, you had people directly reporting to you sexual misconduct by brothers. I'm talking about Brother Farrell and then Brother BWX. Serious sexual misconduct which they admitted, and so therefore which you understood had in fact occurred. Do you agree with that?
I'm a bit lost in your question. I received a complaint, one complaint about Brother Farrell.
Yes.
And I took what I considered to be appropriate action. I received one complaint against BWX, and I took what I considered to be appropriate action.
Yes. What I'm suggesting to you is that at least after those incidents had occurred, it can't have been totally inconceivable to you anymore, if it ever was, that fellow Christian brothers would engage in serious sexual misconduct.
I think I did not think that. I believe that the brothers were well motivated and were conducting themselves as they ought to. I don't think that no.
So even knowing of particular incidents by brothers in your community, you think you still proceeded on the basis that other brothers wouldn't do the same thing?
Those two instances certainly would not have been a basis for me to doubt the integrity and the probity and the good intentions of the rest of the community.
Do you think, brother, that it's possible you had something of a blind spot on this topic and you didn't hear things about brothers misbehaving in sexual ways because you didn't believe that it could occur and you didn't want to believe that it could occur?
I'm not sure that I would call that, I'm not sure that I would use the expression blind spot. I based my relationship with the brothers in community on the belief that we were all seeking the common good, that we were all voluntarily committing ourselves to seeking union with God, which we in our congregation expressed itself specifically through the ministry of education. I would have believed my fellow brothers, I wouldn't have doubted that my fellow brothers were not motivated in that way.
Thank you, Brother Nangle. I've got no further questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Just a few.
Two, only two?
Just
three,
a few, Your Honour.
four,
I do also.
5, 6. Who should go first? Have you talked about it? You go first.
I might go first if I may.
Does anyone protest that?
No, Your Honour.
Very well.
They're welcome to. Can I just pick up on a topic that you were dealing with, Councillor Sisting, about the climate of the 70s? You think that
Ms.
that
Hanscom,
was...
I think that microphone
I'm sorry, I should
needs to
introduce myself.
No, and also make sure the microphone
Is that better?
Approximately, that's better.
I'm sorry, can I begin again? My name's Hanscom. I'm here for a number of victims of clerical abuse, including abuse by Christian brothers. Can I just pick up on this topic of your view of the climate of the 70s influencing the behaviour of the brothers? Do you remember giving some evidence to Councillor Sisting about that?
Yes.
We've heard evidence in this commission, in this case study, that sexual abuse was happening in Ballarat schools long before the 70s. I represent a man with the pseudonym BAS who was sexually abused in a very severe way in 1955 when he was aged 9. Now, you'd agree that's long before any sexual revolution. It was a very repressive, restricted time, was it not?
I have to agree with that, yes.
Did you know Brother McCarthy?
I lived with Brother McCarthy in community, yes.
Did you know he was known as Slugger?
I didn't know that, no.
Have you read BAS's evidence?
No.
BAS says that on multiple occasions he was given the choice by a slugger between being beaten and masturbating Brother McCarthy with a condom and without. Are you aware of that evidence?
No, I'm not.
That had nothing to do with the sexual revolution, did it?
No, it didn't.
It's more likely, would you agree, in fact, that a climate of secrecy and repression would enable, if not encourage, misconduct.
A climate of secrecy amongst the brothers? Is
Yes.
that what? No, there was never any climate of secrecy amongst the brothers.
You said earlier, in response to Justice McClelland, you take responsibility for what occurred on your watch to the extent you knew about it. You were the superior of that community for a long time. do you take any responsibility for what you did not know?
You're talking now about the 70s when I was...
Yes.
Not about the 1950 case.
Yes.
Certainly I would accept responsibility if there was any failure on my part to know things that reasonably I could have known.
I'm sorry, to rate things? I didn't hear the word. Is it to note?
I would
To know things?
I would accept responsibility for failing to respond to information that was given to me of a serious nature. I would accept responsibility if I had failed to act.
I understand that. I'm asking you a different question. Should you, in your position as superior, have known what the brothers who were misbehaving were doing?
I find that a very difficult question to answer. I knew what was obvious. I knew what was there. I couldn't have known.
No, I accept you can't know what you didn't know. I accept that.
Yes.
Should you have known? Should you have had a system of counselling the brothers, of talking to the brothers, of seeing how they are relating to their pupils?
I imagine that would have been helpful, yes.
Did you have such a system?
And you're talking about the community in the 70s that I was the superior of.
Well, let's start there.
Well, we did have regular meetings. We had our conferences. We had our prayer times together. Is that what you are referring to?
I'm referring to anything you can tell this commission about how you as superior managed or didn't manage what the brothers were doing with the pupils in the school.
I would have to say that I trusted them to behave responsibly.
So I'll repeat my question. Do you now take any responsibility for what you did not know, that you now know in fact occurred?
I suppose it's possible to take responsibility for what I didn't know, yes.
Should you have known?
I'm not sure that I can answer that. I knew what I knew.
Now, you said you regarded Brother Dowland as, quote, enthusiastic. Is that right?
I was referring to him as a teacher.
Right. In fact, he was quite a brutal man, was he not?
I didn't know that at the time I wrote that opinion.
You now know that.
I know it now, yes.
Mr. Claassen gave evidence yesterday. Were you here?
I was, yes.
You heard him give evidence, which nobody has challenged, that Brother Dowland hit him so hard across the head he fell to the floor. He was then aged 11. Was that excessive physical discipline?
I would say it was, yes.
Should anybody ever hit a child about the head?
The brothers were not allowed to do that.
Did you ever hear of such a report?
I didn't, no.
Did you ever make any inquiries about discipline matters, how the brothers were disciplining the children?
I was observant. I don't think I made specific inquiries along those lines.
Yes, I think you said in your evidence that you made random walks around the school. Did you observe ever incidents of corporal punishment in your random walks?
No, I didn't.
Councillor Sisting asked you a question. whether, early in your evidence, whether you had the power to remove a brother teacher from the school. And you didn't actually answer him. You gave him the answer, it was not within my province to transfer a brother from one community to another. That's not actually the same issue, is it? There are two issues. The community is a residential community of persons living together, correct? Yes. And the school is a school staffed by both lay and brother teachers, correct?
Yes.
Can I ask you the question that Councillor Sisting asked you again? Did you, when you were headmaster, as well as superior, but headmaster, have the power to remove a brother from a teaching position in the school?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Who could do that?
The provincial.
And it did occur, did it not?
It occurred, yes.
And it occurred in the case of BWX, at least, on your recommendation.
Yes.
So, as a matter of practicality, you did have that power, didn't you? If you asked the provincial, please remove this teacher, he's behaving badly, that teacher would be removed.
Yes, that's true.
So when you said to Councillor Sisting, I couldn't move a person from one community to another, that was not only not a responsive answer, but in fact, as a matter of practicality, you could remove a teacher, and on occasion did.
My confusion lies in the fact that if I wished to have a brother transferred from the community, I had to do it. I had to make a recommendation to the provincial.
Yes.
It was the provincial who transferred the brother. I couldn't transfer the brother.
Let me ask the question a different way. It was within your power as headmaster of the school, St Patrick's College, to cause a brother teacher to be removed from teaching.
Yes, through the provincial.
Well, through whatever means it was within your power to achieve that.
Yes.
One last question. The visitation reports you've been taken to, you say they were not given or shown to you, is that correct?
Yes.
To whom were they given?
I imagine that the visitation reports were written for the provincial council and that they discussed them.
I didn't hear the last part, sorry.
The visitation reports were written for and presented to the brother provincial.
Right, they were written to the brother provincial.
I think so, yes.
Yes, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honour. Brother Nangle, my name is Sekal. I appear on behalf of a number of people, including Timothy Barlow. Brother, if I could take you please to tab 43, and in particular page ending 0070. Perhaps before I do that, if I could take you please to page ending 0064, the commencement of that tab. And you'll see, brother, that that's a visitation report prepared on the 18th of July 1973. If I could then take you please to page ending 0071, which is the final page of that visitation report. And in particular, the bottom of that page, please. And you'll see that the author of that report, that visitation report, was Brother P.C. Norton. Now, at that time, he was the provincial head, was he not?
He was the brother provincial, yes.
Yes, and had been so since 1966.
I'm not sure of the date.
And remained in that role until 1984.
I beg your pardon?
And remained in that role until 1984?
Again, I'm not sure.
Yes. If I can then take you back, please, to page ending 0070, and approximately halfway down that page, there's an entry in relation to Brother Dowland. And you'll recall that 1973 was, in fact, not only your first year as superior in the Ballarat community and headmaster of St Pat's, but also the first year at which Brother Dowland was present and teaching at St Pat's, was it not?
I think so.
Yes. I can just take you about halfway down that paragraph, and the visitation report reads as follows. Sentence commencing, his schoolwork is good and he is coping very well with the situation in the boarding school. Now, were you aware that he had a role in the boarding school in his first year, 1973?
I think so. I think I appointed him as dormitory master.
Yes.
I'm not sure of that.
And were you aware of any difficulties the brother was having coping with the situation in the boarding school in 1973?
Did I have any indication of...
Of any difficulties Brother Dowland had whilst carrying out activities in the boarding school in 1973?
No, I wasn't aware of any.
Yes, you'll see the visitation report goes on, although by it we mean the boarding school, had its difficulties for him at first. Are you aware of what Brother Norton was referring to there by difficulties?
No, I have no idea.
Did Brother Norton discuss with you the contents of this visitation report at the time of his preparation, and in particular, the entry made there in respect of difficulties Brother Dowland was having in the boarding context?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Yes. Did Brother Norton discuss with you at the time of the preparation of this visitation report any difficulties Brother Dowland was having that were obviously made known to he, Brother Norton, by Brother Dowland?
I have no memory of him doing that.
Yes. When you say you have no memory, does that mean that it's possible that a discussion did in fact take place, but you cannot recall it?
It's more likely that I would remember it if it had taken place. I have no memory of the provincial speaking with me about this brother.
Yes. Thank you. If I can just,
Yvonne, Mother, if I could just check with you. When a visitor came to the school, to whom would he go for the information he got?
My memory of the visitations at that time was that each brother was called to a private interview with the visitor, and matters were discussed there between them. I imagine that would be the way the visitor would come by his information about things.
So when a remark is made, Edward is very conscientious and is appreciated by all. Is the only source of that information Brother Dowland?
I think he would have formed that opinion by asking other brothers about Brother Dowland during their private interviews with him.
Are you suggesting that a visitor would speak to every brother on his visit and get every brother to give him a remark or comment about every other brother?
I don't think that would have happened. I think what was more likely to have happened was that as each brother came in for his interview, he would be invited to raise with the visitor any concerns that he may have observed in the way of community living. And in that way, some members of the community may have commented on the behaviour of another brother.
The visitor would have interviewed you as well?
Oh, yes.
And would have asked you your opinion about the staff members?
Yes, he would have, yes.
So
about the, not so much, you use the word staff members, the members of the community.
all right. So if there were 30 brothers, he would ask you about which of those you might have concerns about?
I'm sure he would have asked me that.
So are you telling us that it's possible that the information in here about Brother Dowland could have been influenced by the visitor's discussions with you?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Brother Nangle, I take it you've read the statement of Timothy Barlow?
Yes,
And you'll recall in that statement he recounts what happened on a night after the SRC meeting, I beg your pardon. And I'll just briefly ask you about a few aspects of that, and in particular paragraph 15 of his statement. And he relates in paragraph 15, I was studying in the classroom when I was punched in the back of the head by Brother Barr, who was the Form 3 doormaster. I could see he was agitated. Then in paragraph 16, Brother Barr told me to leave the room and followed me out. Brother Dowland was waiting outside. I recall that Brother Barr and Brother Dowland were best mates. They then hauled me down to the other end of the corridor where I was subjected to physical and verbal assault by both men. I was a slight and average-sized 15-year-old at the time. As they were beating me, they said things like, "You'll regret this, you fucking lying prick. Who the hell do you think you are, you little smart ass?" Blows were delivered by both men, using open hands mostly to the side and back of my head, and fists only to the upper body. The only way, and I should stress that when Mr. Barlow gave his evidence, there was nothing put to him to contradict the contents of his statement. You'd agree, would you not, that the conduct outlined there by Brothers Barr and Dowland can only be described as absolutely appalling?
yes.
Thank you.
Brother, my name is Taff and I appear on behalf of Stephen Farrell. Just want to ask you, you only ever
Can
received...
you make sure that microphone is picking you up? Yeah.
Is that better, Your Honour? You only ever received a single complaint about Stephen Farrell,
Yes,
and that was a complaint late in 1974,
yes,
and the complaint was made on the same day as the event complained of,
I think, yes, I'm pretty sure it was, yes,
and the complaint came to you through a parent of the boy,
yes.
and it was a complaint about a single child rather than multiple children.
A single child, yes,
And you went and spoke to Stephen Farrell that same day,
yes,
and he admitted to you that the complaint was true,
yes,
and you did never receive any other complaint about him.
no.
Doesn't matter.
My name is O'Brien, and I appear for a witness who's given the pseudonym BWF. You can check your list there and you'll find out who that is. Have you got that?
Yes,
If you grab that list again and you have a look 3 pseudonyms down, you'll see the name BWI. Underneath BWF, there's BWG and then BWI. Do you
yes,
see that?
Yes,
My witness, my client, BWF, went under the surname that is ascribed to BWI. Do you understand that? When he was at your school in 1973.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
My client, BWF,
Yes,
had the same surname
oh,
as BWI. Do you recognise the name?
yes,
I want to ask you about, obviously, the complaint that was made by BWI's mother, or BWG's mother. You understand what I want to ask you about?
I think so, yes.
And you have given evidence already about this topic, and I don't want to regurgitate that evidence or go over it unnecessarily. Do you understand that?
Yes.
You said to His Honour, when you were asked about what BWG's mother told you about the assault by Dowling, that you didn't make inquiries as to the nature or extent of the assault. That's the effect of your evidence, isn't it?
Yes.
In other words, you didn't go to the detail of what Dowling had done to this young child.
Yes.
And so at that stage, in 1973, when this complaint came to you, you were unaware, you say, the extent of the beating that was occasioned to BWG. Is that your evidence?
Yes.
I want to ask you about details that you gave in your statement to this commission about other complaints that were made about other brothers. I want to turn to the complaint that you've documented about Fitzgerald. You say at paragraph 37 of your statement that a father came to you, the father of a child came to you and complained of Fitzgerald kissing children. That's your evidence, isn't it?
Yes.
And you say in paragraph 37 that he was a policeman, this father.
That's a memory that I have, yes.
Right. And he told you that he didn't want his son to be kissed by Fitzgerald. Correct?
Yes.
And then you say in paragraph 37, he did not provide any details. The impression was left with me that Fitzgerald was kissing each of the students as they filed out of the classroom to go home for the day. You see that?
Yes.
So, again, in relation to Fitzgerald, you failed to take from this parent the details of the complaint that was being levelled against Fitzgerald. Is that the case?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you're asking.
You failed on your own account here to take details from the parent about the complaint which was being made against Fitzgerald, correct?
I would have considered what was given to me was adequate without my having to ask any further questions.
Well, did you find out where he was kissing the children? On which part of the body?
No, I didn't.
Did you find out whether the kisses were prolonged on the lips, for example?
I just assumed that if he was doing it to a class of 40 or 50 children, it was a perfunctory thing as they went out of the class.
On the cheeks, on the top of the head, anything like that? No details?
No.
But it was sufficient enough for the father, who was, you say, a police officer, to say that if it kept continuing, if it continued, he'd take the matter to the police himself. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, didn't that indicate to you back in 1973 that he, as a police officer, thought that this was a serious event that was happening at Fitzgerald's classrooms?
At the time that it occurred, I didn't regard it as of such a serious nature. I understood it to be an expression of an eccentric old man.
You might have thought it that way, but the parent obviously thought that it was of sufficient concern to him that he might take it to the police, correct?
You're asking me?
Yes.
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Well, it was obviously of sufficient concern to the parent, a police officer, that he would take the complaint to the police about Fitzgerald's behaviour, correct?
Yes.
Did it strike you in 1973 that the unwanted kissing of a child to perhaps any part of the body might have been a form of sexual harassment?
I'd have to say that I wouldn't have considered it like that at that time.
I want to take you to the complaints made to you in relation to Farrell. That complaint was found at paragraph 64 of your statement and 65. You say in paragraph 65, having already discussed that it was a parent who called you, the complaint was about something with a sexual element, but that the incident, although sufficient concern to lead to a phone call, was limited in nature or not very serious. See that?
Yes.
You go on to say, the parent, I do not believe the parent told me any specific details about the complaint or what the actual behaviour had been. You see that?
Yes.
Is this another instance where you have failed to take the specific details, the particularisation, if you like, of the complaint made against the brother?
Again, I would have regarded what I was told as being sufficient, and it was my understanding at the time that the parent was satisfied that I understood enough to take whatever action was necessary.
Surely you understand now, sir, that it beggars belief that a person in your position and rank in that community would not have asked the parent what they say took place. Do you accept some level of incredulity would come with your response you've just given?
I have difficulty in quite understanding what you want me to say or what you're asking me, but...
Well, I'm suggesting to you that you would have found out. You would have found out from this parent what was being alleged by the brother under your charge.
You're asking me... I'm not sure what you're asking me.
I'm suggesting to you, sir, that if a parent came to you and said something to do with an element of sexual intent had been conducted against their child, you would have said to them, you would have asked them, what do you say happened to your child? What has your child told you?
I think I would have assumed that they would tell me anyway, and they didn't.
But you said, sir, in your statement to this commission, I don't believe the parent told me any specific details about the complaint.
That would be my point, that they told me enough for me to understand that there was some behaviour that was not acceptable.
And you say now that you can't remember what that behaviour was.
I have no memory of what it was.
You've been asked by many people over the past decades about what you knew was happening within the Brotherhood at St Patrick's community, haven't you?
Yes.
You've been asked by the insurance companies who insured the Christian Brothers what you knew was happening in the 1970s, whilst you were the headmaster of St Patrick's, haven't you?
Yes.
You've been asked by the police what you knew about what was happening in the 1970s at St Patrick's College, haven't you?
I can only recall one interview with police that was within the last 12 months, I think.
I'll come back to that. You've been asked also by your own lawyers, the lawyers for the Christian Brothers, what you knew about what was happening in relation to sexual abuse of children, physical abuse of children at St Pat's College in the 1970s, haven't you?
I have been questioned on specific instances. I don't think I've ever been questioned on the generic nature of it.
I want to take you to tab 292, please. Can we go down to the bottom, please, operator? To the bottom of the second page, I should say. Do you recall making a statement to a police officer named Detective Senior Constable Amanda Evans?
Yes, that was the incident I just referred to within the last 12 months, I think.
Thanks.
Or a few years ago, yes.
We go now to paragraph 4. And you see there, you were asked, you stated in this statement apparently, Senior Detective Evans informed me that she was investigating an incident where a complaint had been made, I should just read I'm sure, had been made to me about Brother Stephen Francis Farrell. That was of sexual nature. You see that?
Yes.
You said at paragraph 5, I have a recollection of a complaint being made by the father of a student. I do not have a recollection of what the complaint was about. You see that?
Yes.
Now, that was a statement you made to police, a police officer investigating serious sexual assault. You understood that to be the case?
I beg your pardon?
You understood when you were making that statement, you were giving a statement to a police officer who was investigating a serious sexual assault?
Yes.
And you understood that you were cooperating as best you could with the police in giving them material facts as to your knowledge of the complaints against Farrell?
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yes.
I want to take you now to tab 299. And page 5, which is with the ringtail ended 0006. You see the second question on that page. Just to identify this document, I apologise. This is a document where you were being interviewed by Howard Harrison. Howard Harrison. Remember him?
Yes.
He was the lawyer for the Christian Brothers at the time, was he? In 2014?
I'm not sure what his role was.
And he was inquiring of you as to issues known to you about child sexual assault happening whilst you were the headmaster and superior at St Patrick's, correct?
Of this specific incident?
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed, you can look through it if you wish. He was asking you about a number of brothers in this interview. He asked you, this document's been shown to you earlier today.
Yes.
Okay. I want to just take you to this question here. The question starts, and I think we mentioned that you did have to go through an interview with the police in relation to a matter which they were investigating about 2 years ago. See that?
Yes.
Yes, 2 police from Geelong. I told these two about that. They came up to see me at St Kilda, where I live. See that?
Yes.
Okay. And your answer to the next question was, I think it might have been Stephen Farrell. Yes, it would have been. I've never been questioned about anyone else, just Stephen. See that your response there?
Yes.
And that's the interview that you've just been referred to, isn't it?
I think so, yes. Yes, it is.
And it looks like Harrison's asked you, and you gave them a statement. You see that?
Yes.
In your response. For what it's worth, I say that because the lady, I've forgotten her name now, but there was 2 of them, the policewoman was the senior one, and neither of them had sufficient understanding of what we were to ask the right questions. They sort of asked me what parishes I had been in charge of, and the sort of people, as if I was conducting marriages and things. They didn't have any concept of the fact that of who I was. You see that?
Yes.
your next response, I did give a statement and I signed it, but it was pretty non-committal, a pretty amorphous sort of statement. You see that?
Yes.
What you've told Harrison there is you didn't tell the police the truth. Did you?
I told the police what they want. I answered the questions of the police.
Well, but you were told by the police that they were investigating a complaint of a sexual nature.
Yes.
You have given evidence to this commission you received a complaint with a sexual element in it.
Yes.
You told police you had no information to give them about a complaint of sexual nature, didn't you?
I'm not sure what you're saying there.
Well, I just took you to the police statement, didn't I?
Yes.
And in that police statement, it was clear that you were being asked about a complaint of a sexual nature by the police in relation to Farrell, yes?
Yes.
And you told them you had nothing to offer to them in their investigation.
I told them what I knew.
You lied to the police, sir, didn't you?
I believe I didn't. I answered their questions honestly, and
You gave them a non-committal, amorphous sort of statement.
I answered their questions. Those words, non-committal and amorphous statements, were the kind of questions that I was being asked. They were asking questions of such a nature as indicated they didn't understand who I was or what our work was, and I answered those questions as best I could.
But when you were asked as to whether you received a complaint of a sexual nature, you said you had not.
I'm not sure what you're asking. You're asking.
You were asked, police, when you were asked, police, by the police, as to whether you'd received a complaint about Farrell of a sexual nature, you said you had not.
I'm confused. I don't think I said that.
We'll go back to that tab then. What number was it? 292. So have a look there. 4 and 5, read them over to yourself. You did not tell the police about information you had of receiving a complaint about Farrell of a sexual nature. You withheld that information, didn't you?
I believe I told the police that I had received a complaint about Stephen Farrell.
But you could not recall what the complaint was about. That's what you told the police, isn't it?
And that is the position I have sustained all along. I have no memory of what that particular complaint was.
So the position that you've maintained all along is you either got complaints that had no detail or you can't recall getting complaints at all, correct?
I'm not sure what part of that to answer.
Well, answer the first part. You have either said, on the one hand, that you've all along, that you have received complaints that had no detail or no specifics, or alternatively, you have no recollection of receiving complaints of a sexual nature, correct?
And you're referring to the Stephen Farrell.
Well, that's what you said to the police in relation to Farrell.
Well, with regard to Stephen Farrell, I have consistently maintained that I received a complaint about him, but I have no memory of what the specific details of what that complaint was, except that I've always understood that it to be of some sort of improper conduct.
you have said in relation to Brother Dowland specifically that you have received no complaints in relation to his behaviour whilst you were headmaster of a sexual nature, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And I'm suggesting to you, sir, that you would say anything to protect your own reputation or the reputation of the Brotherhood. Is that right?
No, that's not right.
And, sir, that is what this statement to the police that you made in 2014 demonstrates. 2012 demonstrates. You would say whatever it takes to protect your reputation.
I would reject that.
When you were taken by counsel assisting to the letter that you wrote to the editors of the Age newspaper and asked by both counsel assisting and His Honour about that document, that letter, you accepted that that was your attempt to clarify things to your mind as to what complaints you had received from parents. Is that right?
The writing of that letter was in response to some publicity that somebody had sent to me into Fiji from Melbourne, and I was upset by that kind of publicity.
And this is the document that you were prepared to have the community at large see about what you knew and what you didn't know and the actions that you took or couldn't take as a result of that, the reports that had been made in relation to criminal proceedings. Is that right?
My recollection is that I wrote this letter in response to some claims made about accusations that were made against St Patrick's College, which I thought at that time were unsubstantiated and unfair, and I wrote that letter and submitted it to my provincial for his consideration.
This appears to be, and I invite your comment, another attempt to deny responsibility where, in fact, it appears responsibility was to be had by you. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I can only say that I was always prepared to accept responsibility. I wasn't evading it. You were spoken to by Howard Harrison again in tab 299, and in that interview, notwithstanding that you had received, in fact, a complaint about Fitzgerald kissing people, you said to Harold Harrison, and this was this document was shown to you by counsel assisting. There was never any suggestion of improper conduct. Never, you said to your lawyer, who was asking about what you knew. If it never arose, and I was never aware of it. That's what you said to Harold Harrison. Another attempt at denying what you now accept you knew. Isn't that right? It's the bottom of page 0006. So 0004. Thank you. Go down there. So you've got that?
Yes.
January 2014, we know what you knew about Fitzgerald to the extent you've divulged it. But you tell Harrison, interested in wanting to know what you knew, you said, never. Never any suggestion of improper conduct, never. It never arose and I was never aware of it. How on earth do you justify that answer?
I don't think I have to justify it. I was referring to the period up to that moment. Up to that moment when this particular incident occurred, I had never heard any suggestion of improper conduct against Brother Fitzgerald. And that's what that statement is meant to convey.
Well, in fairness to you, sir, you're asked about what you knew about Fitzgerald in this interview at that point, and that's what you said. It's not about the context of hearing about something before or after. That's what you said you knew about Fitzgerald and whether he'd been improper with students. Knowing when you had that interview that Fitzgerald was kissing every student as they went in the classroom or out of the classroom, and whatever the specifics were, and whatever the part of the body they may have been kissed. That's what you said to your lawyers. That's the basis upon which you thought you might be defended by them. Justify it. Justify that statement.
Thank you. This statement is in relation to the one incident, the one complaint that I received about Brother Fitzgerald. And up to that one complaint, I had never been given any information about him of improper conduct, nor had I ever observed or heard any suggestion of improper conduct up to that point. And that's what I'm saying. But in my time there was never any suggestion of an improper conduct, never. It never arose. I'm not including in that statement the specific incident that we were discussing.
No, you don't raise it at all, do you?
Well, I understand that's what the whole thing is about.
Well, I think you need to read it, sir, because this is the point at which, after having been asked by others who were under your charge, you were asked about Fitzgerald. That's the context. If I'm wrong about that, your lawyer will jump up and correct me, but that is all you said about what you knew of Fitzgerald in that interview. That's it.
Yeah, that has been my consistent line, and it is the truth that up to the time that that complaint was made and on which I acted immediately, I had never heard of any complaint or suggestion of improper conduct made against the man.
I want to ask you about the injuries sustained by BWG and the complaint made by his mother. There was a document which was shown to you. I don't think it was tendered. It had the... tab 312. Can tab 312 be shown to the witness, please? And again, this is a document that was taken to you, or shown to you by counsel assisting. And you saw, you say for the first time, do you, the extent of the injuries occasioned on this young child, BWG. Is this the first time you ever learnt that these injuries were occasioned to him?
The first time I learned of it when I was shown this document, I had no previous knowledge of the extent of the injuries.
And you say that the mother didn't describe the extent of the injuries at all?
That's true.
And you didn't inquire as to the extent of the injuries? You didn't get the details? Is that the case?
Yes.
So here's a mother presenting to you a case of a complaint of excessive corporal punishment. You knew that to be the case?
Yes.
And she has, it appears, a very seriously injured young boy on her hands. Is that the case?
I didn't understand that the extent of the injuries were so serious when she came to see me.
Well, you accept now that this was the extent of the injuries. You could see the buckle on his skin. He was beaten from the lower back down to the top of his legs and right down through his crutch. He was very badly bruised. He was in a bit of a mess. Do you accept that that was the extent of the injuries?
I do now.
And you didn't make any inquiries as to how this child had been injured or whether the child had been injured?
I believe I would have given the mother every opportunity to talk to me, and she gave no indication that the extent of the injuries were this.
Do you understand from this document that she has come after seeing a doctor to you to complain about what had happened to her son?
My understanding is that the mother came to see me before she went to the doctor, but
Brother, it is troubling. Let me put my difficulty to you. This is the mother's account of very significant injury to her child, isn't it?
yes,
You accepted a moment ago that this is a true account.
yes.
It's very difficult to understand how it, in those circumstances, could be that the mother approaches you to complain about the injuries to her child, but she doesn't tell you of those injuries. Do you understand the problem I have?
That is how it happened.
Do you understand the problem I have?
I think so.
It just seems extraordinarily unlikely.
She did not convey to me any of this.
So you say that the imprints, the beaten down to the tops of his legs, crotch, and the summary, he was a bit of a mess, was not conveyed to you.
That's true.
You see, the other difficulty His Honour and these commissioners will no doubt have, without getting into their mind, and no doubt anyone who might be listening to your evidence, is that you seem to suggest that people came with complaints to you but didn't detail what happened. That's the general theme of your evidence. Do you accept that?
I think two people came. Two people came.
Well, I've taken you to the Fitzgerald incident where you didn't inquire as to the kisses. I've taken you to the Farrell incident where you didn't bother to find out what the parent was saying happened to the child. And now the mother turns up, a viciously beaten child on her hands, and you don't make the inquiries, and she doesn't tell you.
She gave no indication to me that the child was viciously beaten.
That is just, that I suggest to you is untrue.
I have given the truth.
Can I just ask everyone to respect the need for the witness to be able to give his evidence appropriately? I'd be grateful if we didn't comment on the way through. Yes.
You said, after speaking to the mother, whatever the conversation, that you hoped she would not go to the police. That's the evidence you've given in your statement. Do you recall? You say, and Councillor Sissing read to you a little bit about this woman's background. Do you remember being taken to that? It's in this same document.
I think so, yes.
You knew, or at least you know now, if you didn't know it then, that she was a devout Catholic. Is that the case?
Yes.
She was brought up in a Catholic home. Her parents were Catholic. She was educated at St. Pildus in England. She went to Mass every day before school. She went to church 3 times on Sunday. And for that reason, the boys went St. Pat's. You see that?
I'm not seeing that.
You were taken to it before, but you can have a look at it. It's on the bottom of page 2. You see all that?
Oh, yes.
Now, she has said later on that you told her, well, I'll just read it. Brother Nangle sort of talked to me about it. This is going to the police. And he said it was a big blot on the Catholic Church, which it probably would have been, and St. Patrick's being an exclusive type of college, it would have been bad for them. See that?
Yes.
Would it have been a big blot if this woman had gone to the police and told them that her son had been assaulted in this fashion by a brother under your charge at that school?
Would it have been a big blot?
Would it have been a big blot on the Catholic Church?
I'm not sure.
Would it have been bad for the reputation of St. Patrick's?
I would have reflected poorly on our reputation, yes.
Is that why you hoped she wouldn't go to the police?
No, I don't think so.
Why did you hope that she wouldn't go to the police? Were you protecting Dowland?
Oh, certainly not. I would have regarded the matter as not being of sufficient seriousness to involve the police.
Do you accept that someone such as this woman, a single parent with the children at your school, would have been, with that background, Catholic upbringing, would have been very significantly influenced by your appeal to her not to go to the police?
I didn't appeal to her not to go to the police.
You simply expressed that you hope she didn't. Is that your evidence?
My memory is that towards the end of the interview, the matter came up that she would consider going to the police, and my memory is that I told her that that was certainly her option, but that I hoped that she would consider not doing it.
So when you said to her it's her option, you knew that that was certainly something which was opened by the complaint that she'd put to you.
At the time of the complaint, I had no knowledge of the seriousness of the beating, and I would have thought that the excessive corporal punishment would not have warranted police action.
But you say you didn't know the extent or gravity of the corporal punishment.
I didn't know that until
nature of it.
Yes.
Did you yourself use a leather strap in disciplining students?
My memory is that I didn't use it in my own management of classes, but as a headmaster, from time to time, teachers did send me students who were fractious and undisciplined and requested me to give them punishment, and I did use the strap on those occasions.
The answer is yes, you used the leather strap to discipline students.
Yes.
Thank you. You have taken issue with something that has been raised by BWG in paragraph 93 of your statement. I want to take you to that so you can examine it. I can find my copy of it. We go to 93, please. Now, BWG, in a statement to police, said this is what you're referring to in paragraph 93, I take it. I returned to the school. This is after being belted by Dallin and dealing with yourself. The next day, and from then on I was belted repeatedly by numerous of the teachers, including Brother Nangles, Barr, Ring, Mr Holloway and Mr Charleson. You see that?
I Don't see that.
Well, do you remember reading that?
I don't remember reading that.
Will you take it from me, please, that is what Mr. BWG said took place after he was assaulted by Dowling, okay? And you said in paragraph 93 in response to that, BWG claims that I myself belted him. That's not true. Do you accept that you may have yourself disciplined him by use of the strap after this incident in 1973? Is that a possibility?
My recollection is that I never administered corporal punishment to this child.
You recall specifically not strapping him?
That would be a difficult thing. No, I can't say that. But I have no memory of using the strap on this boy.
Well, so it's possible that after he was belted by Dowling in the way in which we've discussed, it is possible that you may have disciplined him using the strap.
I'm inclined to say that that's not true. I'm inclined to say that I did not use the strap on this child.
You have no distinct recollection of doing so or not?
I have no distinct recollection of punishing this boy. I had no reason to, and I'm almost certain that I didn't.
You say that you've got no recollection also of a police officer by the name of Constable Doc Bevan in connection with the Dowling beating of BWG.
That's true.
Is that because you can't recall it or it didn't happen?
I believe it didn't happen.
But, sir, you have accepted in evidence earlier that your memory is failing in relation to some of these issues.
That's true.
I suggest, sir, that your memory may well have failed in relation to the involvement of Constable Doc Bevan in connection with the BWG beating.
Except that it does seem to me that it is of such gravity that I would have remembered such an incident, and I have no memory of it.
The difficulty with that response, sir, is that there have been so many things put to you of such utmost gravity that you have no recollection of recalling. Do you accept that?
I suppose it's age-related to a certain extent.
Thank you. You say that Dowling came to you in relation to this matter and he made admissions that he'd excessively beat BWG. Is that the case?
Yes.
You say that he asked your permission to go to BWG's house and apologise to the parents. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know if he did?
No.
Did you follow up with him as to whether he had done that?
I can't remember doing so.
Did you think to yourself, this might not be a great idea to send around the brother who's just admitted to excessively corporally punishing a student to the parent's house? I might even put the brother's life at risk. Safety.
At the time, I would have concluded that it was a fairly honourable thing for the brother to admit that he had failed and that he wished to make amends for it.
So you can say that he came to you and asked permission to do it, but you don't know whether he did or not.
Well, there's no reason for me to think that he didn't do it.
Did you ever follow up with Dowling whether he'd gone to the parents' house?
I would have seen no reason to do so.
You wouldn't have wanted to know how he'd gone with the parents after admitting to you that he'd excessively beaten the child?
Some 50 years later, I really can't recall what the conversations would have been.
Dr. Hanscom put some propositions to you in relation to the connection, if you like, between corporal punishment and child sexual abuse that was going on in the 1970s at your school. Remember those questions?
Yes.
And I want to put a general proposition to you. Child sexual abuse at St Patrick's College was allowed to flourish because of the severe corporal punishment that was meted out by the teachers, including your brothers. Do you accept that?
No, I would not accept that.
You heard about Dr. Hanscom's client, the client who was given, the student, I'm sorry, who was given the choice, get a beating or masturbate me. You've heard about Dowling, who sexually assaulted and beat children almost simultaneously, one after the other. You've heard about children who fought off Dowling and then were physically punished for having beaten him off or fought their way free of his molestation. How can you not accept the proposition that I've just put to you?
I was unaware, of course, that these things were happening.
Well, unaware, aware, it doesn't matter. Do you accept now, as a matter of common sense, that the physical domination and punishment meted out by teachers led to a sense of fear and repression that allowed child sexual abuse by predators to continue and flourish?
I would be very hesitant to make a general statement of that kind. It may have been applicable to individual cases, but I would be hesitant to say that it was applicable across the board.
You were asked by His Honour on a different topic now about the psychosexual development of the brothers and particularly of yourself in relation to why this stuff happened under your watch. Remember?
Yes.
I want to take you to that tab 299 again, if I may, the interview with Harrison, conducted in Melbourne in 2014. And you said on the page with the, it's page 5 of the document and page 0006 in the tender bundle. You said, this is the last series of sentences. The other thing that I, as a person, as a human being, was possibly not as worldly wise at that age and understood. I didn't understand then what I understand now about pedophilia. You asked perhaps, should perhaps I have been better prepared? I think I was well enough prepared, but in my own person I might have been a bit immature in that way. I think I was. You see, you've said that to your lawyer in 2014?
Yes.
When you talk about immaturity, you are talking about in that sense, your limited or in some way frustrated psychosexual development, aren't you?
I would have thought it was broader than that and inclusive of the whole worldly nature of living in a contemporary society.
Is what you're saying there that you were naive to all these things that were obviously happening under your watch that you were not aware of?
You're referring to the 70s?
Yes.
I think that I would agree that there was some naivety in my outlook. I trusted people.
A blind trust.
I beg your pardon?
A blind trust.
Whatever that is.
Well, you were blind to whether they were doing things or not, but you trusted them. Obviously what took place, isn't it?
Whenever I was made aware of misconduct, I acted to correct it. I wasn't blind to it. Perhaps greater worldly wisdom, I might have been more alert to signs that were there.
Or you might have made proper inquiries.
I'm sorry, I beg
You
your
might
pardon.
have made proper inquiries, perhaps.
Well, I think I always made proper inquiries.
I want to ask you about then Father George Pell. You've had evidence. You've heard some of the evidence in this inquiry, haven't you, in relation to the survivors of child sexual abuse at St Patrick's in the 1970s?
I'm sorry, what did you ask?
You've been present, have heard or taken to it by your lawyers the evidence of survivors of child sexual abuse at St Patrick's College in the 1970s.
I've been shown material, yes.
And you've heard in evidence from boys at the school in 1973 and 1974 that George Pell had a strong connection with the school. Do you agree with that?
I haven't heard that, and I wouldn't agree with it.
You wouldn't agree with it?
That George Pell had a strong connection with the school.
In 1973 and 1974, Father George Pell, as he was then, had a strong connection to the school. Do you agree with that?
To my memory, he was never there.
There's evidence being given in these proceedings that boys remember seeing Father George Pell around the school grounds.
Well, my recollection is that Father Pell, as an old boy of the college, may have attended football games or inter-school sports events, but even of that I'm not sure. He had no connection with the college.
There's so he had connection with the football games and with other sporting events, but you say that's not a connection with the college.
Oh well, half of Ballarat used to come to see them. And he was no different from all the other people who were part of the people observing.
I've had the advantage, sir, of having a look at the yearbooks in 1973 and 74. Do you understand that?
I beg your pardon?
I've had the advantage of having a look at the yearbooks for St Patrick College of 1973 and 1974. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And I can tell you that Father Pell, as he was then, it appears did have a strong connection with the school. For example, in 1973, he officiated at the wedding of his brother, David, at the Chapel College. Do you recall that?
I think I do, but that's not a connection with the college.
Well, it's an event occurring within the college chapel.
People used to make arrangements to use the chapel as a venue for weddings. It had nothing whatever to do with the college.
The reason I suspect that he may have chosen that chapel over every other chapel in Ballarat or church was because of his strong connection with the school. Do you accept that?
Well, that may well have been in his mind. It was a somewhat fashionable venue for a wedding, and it was used by many couples for their weddings.
He was an old boy.
George Pell.
Yes.
Yes, and so was David, his brother.
David was an old boy.
Yes.
And in 1973, you said that, I withdraw that, in those yearbooks, there seems to be a great deal of pride taken in the fact that old boys became priests. I think in 1973, 300 and something old boys had become by that stage priests. And that was a sense of great deal of pride in the school. Do you remember writing about that?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And Father George Pell, as he then was a distinguished old boy within the community in 1973, correct?
What was the last part? He was what? He was...
I'll read it. Father George Pell, as he then was a distinguished old boy within the community in 1973.
Within the broad community?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
And within the school community also, more specifically.
Well, we would have been very proud of him, yes.
Indeed, in 1973, you recall that he gave a speech at the old Collegians Association meeting. Do you recall that?
I don't remember. That would have had nothing to do with me, and I have no memory of it.
It was at the annual reunion dinner of the old boys, or the old Collegians Association, which happened on the boat race weekend.
That used to happen annually.
It's something that you could understand Father Pell being invited to talk at, yes?
He would have been invited by the executive of the Old Boys Association, and that was quite distinct from the college administration.
In that particular event, he was described as a distinguished old collegian.
You wish me to agree with that?
Would you agree with that?
Well, I would, yes, yes.
So, coming back to the questions I asked you at the outset, did Father George Pell have a strong connection with St Patrick's College in 1973, 1974?
No, he didn't have a strong connection with the college, other than being a distinguished old boy. The fact that he married his younger brother and used the college chapel, the fact that he was invited by the old boys to give the address at their annual meeting, were things that were quite separate from the college.
So when you hear evidence from survivors such as Mr Timothy Green and Mr BWF as to their occasional sightings of Father Pell, unchallenged evidence, incidentally, of him being around the college from time to time, do you reject that out of hand, do you?
No, I don't reject that. I'm sure he would have been an interested spectator at the inter-school football games, as were many other people.
Brother, was Father Pell in those days a prominent Catholic priest in the community?
Your Honour, I'm not too sure that I'm the one who should be answering that, but in my memory, Father Pell had not long previously returned from Oxford, where he had graduated as a Doctor of Philosophy, and my memory is that he took up pastoral work as an assistant priest at Ballarat East. And they were his beginning years. My memory is that he was very popular and well regarded. But beyond that, I'm not in any position to comment on his place in the society.
We have evidence about his family and him being brought up in Ballarat and playing football and obviously being a very talented sportsman. Was that sense of him one that you had in those days?
Those, Your Honour, those were facts that were well known.
They were well known.
I'm not sure about his family. I think his parents were deceased. I'm not too sure about the situation of his family. I can't comment on that, but he himself was well regarded by, I believe, was well regarded by the people in the community.
Nothing further, thank you.
Commission, please. Brother Nangle, my name's Shaw. I appear on behalf of two survivors, Andrew Collins and Stephen Woods. They were both students at St Pat's when you were headmaster in the 70s. Do you remember that?
I don't remember Andrew Collins.
Stephen Woods?
I remember Stephen Woods more for the name than the boy.
Now, we're going to ask you about something that I suggest you definitely will know something about, and that's the Catholic Catechism. No doubt, having been in religious orders for several decades, you would know it very well.
I missed the word, the Catholic what? The
Catechism.
Oh, the Catechism.
Yes. You know it very well, I would think.
Well, I used to.
Well, let's see if we can remind you of some of it. I downloaded this last week off the Vatican website, so I dare say it's accurate. But you'll let me know if it's not. Item 2389, Brother Nangle, which finds itself under the Part 4, Offences Against the Dignity of Marriage. I'll read it out. Connected to incest is any sexual abuse perpetrated by adults on children or adolescents entrusted to their care. The offence is compounded by the scandalous harm done to the physical and moral integrity of the young, who will remain scarred by it all their lives, and the violation of responsibility for their upbringing. Have I correctly cited the Catholic Catechism?
Yes, I think you're quoting from the Catholic Catechism written by John Paul II.
Yes.
It's not the catechism that was in use in schools. It's a reference book, but the answer to your question is yes, I agree.
What I've read to you there, that item of the Catechism, one of many obviously, that was part of the Catholic Catechism in some form in the 70s, wasn't it?
Yes, I imagine it's covered by the commandments.
Well, that's not the question, because the Catechism expands on the commandments at great length, doesn't it?
Yes,
The commandments are quite pithy, aren't they? They're pretty short.
yes,
Catechism's very long,
yes,
because it expands on it.
yes.
What I've just read to you, that concept, whether in those words or not, was part of the Catholic Catechism in the 1970s.
Yes.
Yes?
The concept was yes.
So breaching that, or committing that offence as it's called, would that have been considered a sin? Yes? To breach the Catechism is a sin, is it not?
I'm not a theologian,
I'm not suggesting you are.
but you're asking me a question which touches on the matter of conscience, and I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that.
With respect, it's got nothing to do with conscience. It's an act. If you commit the act, is it a sin?
I think theologians would debate your assertion.
What's your view on it?
My view on what constitutes a sin.
No. If you breach Clause 2389, which I've just read to you, if you commit that offence, forget about your conscience, if you commit that act as a Catholic, it's a sin, isn't it?
I couldn't answer that with a yes or a no. There are so many other factors that would have to come into the consideration of it. The act in itself...
You're honestly saying, sorry to interrupt, are you honestly saying that whether or not committing a sex crime against a child is a sin is a relative matter?
I'm suggesting that the act in itself, and please remember I'm not a theologian,
So you are.
but I'm suggesting that the act in itself is intrinsically evil, but the perpetrator of that act may or may not be guilty of sin in the eyes of God.
All right. Well, let's suppose the person who committed the act was a Christian brother who knew full well the terms of the catechism, it would be a sin, wouldn't it?
Speaking objectively,
Yes.
yes.
It would be a mortal sin or just a grave sin?
Again, what constitutes a mortal sin as distinct from a venial sin involves many aspects, and objectively, without any consideration of other factors, I would say yes, that would constitute a mortal sin.
So if you committed that act and you died without having confessed it, you'd go to hell. Is that right? That's my understanding of a mortal sin, am I right?
I'm very reluctant to commit myself to such straight... God is a God of mercy. God is not a judgmental God, and God welcomes sinners as well as saints. And I'm not the one who would condemn a sinner to hell. Only God can do that.
I'm not asking you to condemn anyone. I'm asking you to answer questions about the catechism. Were you teaching the catechism to the kids at St Pat's? Some of it?
We taught a course called Religious Education. I think the aspect of teaching religion from a catechism has long been gone from Catholic education.
I'm talking about the 1970s. 40 years ago.
Yes.
So you were teaching it in those days?
We certainly weren't teaching that catechism. No,
A version of it.
We were teaching Catholic doctrine and Catholic dogma and Catholic history.
All right, let's just move on a bit. You said in relation to sexual abuse perpetrated by adults on children or adolescents entrusted to their care might not always be sinful. That's what you said before. Yeah? It depends on the person's, for example, intention, their conscience, things like that.
Insofar as I've understood your question, yes.
All right. Interesting though, the next section, 2390, talks about sex between consenting heterosexual adults. And it says this: the sexual act must take place exclusively within marriage. You would agree with that? That's what the church says about this?
I agree that that's the church's teaching, yes.
The next thing says, outside of marriage, it always constitutes a grave sin and excludes one from sacramental communion. Do you agree that that's the church's teaching? Always.
Again, objectively, yes.
Well, I'm asking you objectively. So you say yes. So, just to tease this out a little further, if I may, Brother Nangle. A man and a woman who are over the age of 18, deeply in love with each other, faithful to one another in all respects, have sex, loving act, that, according to the church, is always a grave sin if they're not married. Correct?
You're asking me if that is the teaching of the church?
Yes or no question. Is that the teaching or isn't it?
Well, as I understand it, it is, yes.
However, sexual abuse by a teacher on a child, you said, is not always a grave sin. It depends. Is that right?
I'm sorry if I gave the impression of that. I think it's always evil.
All right, go again. So you're saying that, even though it doesn't say it in the catechism, sexual abuse perpetrated by, let's say, a Christian brother on a child he's teaching, that's always a sin as well, isn't it? Doesn't matter what's in his mind. It's the act.
I'm uncomfortable about using the word sin in describing this act, but yes, I would agree that if a Christian brother was to perform a sexual act with another minor, it is a sin.
And you said probably a mortal sin.
Well, yes.
And that's
a serious matter.
talk about mortal sins and so on, and I'm not saying you're the one who judges these matters, but you would have taught that in the 70s, that there are mortal sins and venial sins, wouldn't you? You would have taught the children that.
Yes, I'm not at all sure that they present that kind of religious education anymore, but it would have been taught in that way perhaps once.
Oh, in the 70s it was, certainly.
In the 70s.
In Catholic schools?
The religious education programs in the 70s had already begun to go through a period of reformation following Vatican II and had taken on a whole different aspect. It was no longer legalistic or dogmatic in the sense of a catechism.
All right, I'm going to ask you some questions now about your memory, Brother Nangle. Your memory of some of the things you've been asked about over the last few hours is quite poor, that's right?
It is quite poor, yes. I'm
You've
84.
said quite a few times, look, I don't remember that.
Yes, I'm a very old man, and since leaving St Patrick's, I have not been living in Australia, and I've taught thousands of students in another culture. And this afternoon and today, I have been asked to recall details of things like conversations and telephone messages of 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
I submit that my memory is poor for
Yes,
those sorts of things.
So you agree that, your memory of these things is poor, and you've just given some fairly good reasons, one might think, for why that might be.
Yes.
In some instances, your memory is incomplete in that you remember certain things about an event, but not all of it. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
All right. Now, were you here this morning when Mr. Barlow gave his evidence?
Yes.
Yesterday, I beg your pardon. Yeah, my memory's not so
I
good
was
either.
here.
Yesterday?
I was here
You were
yesterday.
here? You heard what he said?
Yes.
All right. Might just go through what he said, because it was yesterday. It's tab 5, page .004.
Well, Commission Pleasers, I may well object to that. I don't know what's coming. Obviously, I'm here representing Mr. Barlow. We've had discussion, evidence has been given. That evidence hasn't been challenged. I'll just flag that,
I think we all have to wait and see, don't we?
I don't propose to challenge the evidence at all. I simply want to ask Brother Nangle a few things about it. But of course, if there's an objection. All right, so I'm just going to read a couple of things from his statement, Brother Nangle. So we're on page 4, tab 5. Might just wait for that to come up. Right, here we go. All right, so it's page 0004. All right, so your name is there, Brother Paul Nangle.
Yes.
Paragraph 20. And we've already heard about the physical confrontation between Brothers Barr and Dolan and Mr. Barlow. Yes?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? All right. He says at paragraph 20, I recall that a day or two after the confrontation with Brothers Barr and Dolan, I was called to Brother Nangle's office. Now, do you remember calling him to your office? I'm just going to break this down piece by piece, see what you remember. Do you remember that?
No, I have no memory.
I do object. The evidence from the statement of this witness is that he has no recall. That's the evidence. He has no recall of this event occurring.
That may be so, but that doesn't mean Mr. Shaw can't put it to him.
Commission, please. All right, so I'll just break it down. So that first part, do you remember that?
I have no memory of Mr. Barlow coming to my office.
All right, so therefore, paragraph 21, when he says, I went to Brother Nangle's office by myself, Brother Nangle explained to me in measured tones that being young, there were things that I wouldn't be able to understand and that I could say things without realising what the consequences would be. He told me that being on the SRC was a privilege and an honour, a position not to be abused. So your evidence is you don't remember that at all?
I have no memory of that.
Okay. Paragraph 22, Brother Nangle told me I had to be more discerning and avoid spreading lies, and told me that I would have to recant the allegation about Brother Dowling touching boys at the next school assembly. I think he told me then that the SRC was being suspended until the students learned to exercise their responsibilities in a more mature fashion. Again, you don't have any recollection of any of that.
I have no memory of the report coming to me from Brother Dowling. I have no memory at all of suspending the SRC, and I have no memory of requiring Mr. Barlow to make an apology.
And I take it then, if we go over the page to 0005, paragraph 23, your evidence will be also that you have no recollection of paragraph 23. That is, that at the next school assembly, Brother Nangle, you announced that the SRC was to be disbanded as a result of certain students using it to spread scurrilous lies about the brothers. You don't remember any of that?
I have no memory of that.
And finally, paragraph 24, Brother Nangle then asked me to come forward and apologise to the school for spreading lies. I'll just skip a bit. Then so I walked to the front of the assembly area and said something like, sorry for lying. So again, you would say you have no memory of that happening.
I have no memory of that.
Now, you're not saying, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not saying Mr. Barlow's lying, are you?
I'm not saying that, yes.
And you're not saying that he's mistaken?
No, I'm not saying that he is
Because you can't say he's mistaken because you don't remember anything.
I just don't remember this.
Okay. And you're not saying he's got a memory problem, that his memory's inaccurate?
I beg your pardon?
You're not saying Mr. Barlow's got a problem with his memory, are you?
I'm not making that suggestion, no.
Okay. And your lawyers haven't challenged Mr. Barlow's evidence in any way?
I'm sorry?
Your lawyers haven't challenged Mr. Barlow's evidence in any way?
That's a matter we can observe. I don't know if the witness needs to answer that question.
Very well, Your Honour. And you certainly accept, well, I think you'd have to, that his memory of those events that I've just referred to is much, much better than yours in that he has quite a detailed memory and you have none at all.
Yes.
So let's accept for a moment that what he says is true and correct on that basis. Clearly, there was a suspicion among the students, which was reported to you, that Dowling was sexually assaulting and physically beating the children at your school. Can we accept that?
I accept that Mr. Barlow said that.
And you accept that he's not lying and that he's not mistaken? Yep.
I would not want to say that, yes.
Right, so you accept he's telling the truth?
Oh, well,
You have to, don't you?
Yes.
All right, so if we accept that he's telling the truth and he's reliable, clearly, as a matter of fact, there was a suspicion among the students, which was reported to you, that Dowling was sexually assaulting and physically assaulting some of the children at your school where you were the headmaster, yep?
I would have to say that I was never given that information. I was never told that Brother Dowling was sexually abusing students.
Well, these two things can't coexist. You've accepted that Mr. Barlow is gave a truthful and reliable account. If he did, then you knew. Isn't that right? You might not remember it, but if he's truthful and reliable on these points, you knew. Is that right?
If I may be permitted, it's possible that there is another explanation.
Well, I just want to go back a step. I just want to make sure you've got very clear what I'm asking you here. You have said that Mr. Barlow is telling the truth. He must be, because you can't dispute that.
I can't remember these events.
He says he remembers it well. You accept that given you can't remember it, and given that you're not calling him a liar and you're not saying he's got it wrong, as a matter of simple logic, you accept that he is telling the truth and his recollection is accurate, correct?
I would like to be permitted to offer an alternative.
Well, that may be a matter for the Commission, but I'm cross-examining you, and I just want an answer to that question.
Well, I feel that I cannot say a simple yes or no to the way you have presented the matter.
With respect, I suggest that the way I've asked the question makes it very easy for you to either say yes or no. There's no other alternative, I wouldn't have thought.
I think it's possible for me to maintain the view, the truth, that I was never informed of sexual misconduct by Brother Dowland, and I think we can explain in another way how it's possible that I didn't hear it in this way.
If Mr. Barlow is telling the truth, that is, he's not lying, and if Mr. Barlow is accurate in his memory and his recollections about these very specific matters in those 4 paragraphs, it must be the case that he was called to your office by himself, that you explained to him that being young, there were things that he wouldn't be able to understand, and that he could say things without realising what the consequences would be, and that you said to him being on the SSE was a privilege and an honour, a position not to be abused. As a matter of simple logic, that must be correct.
Yes.
Yep. And it must also be correct that you told him that he, Timothy Barlow, had to be more discerning and avoid spreading lies, and that he would have to recant the allegation about Brother Dowland touching boys, and that he would have to do that at the next school assembly. Again, as a matter of simple logic, that must be the fact. And your memory does not permit you to say otherwise. Yes or no?
I would have to say yes to the way you're presenting that.
All right.
Mr. Shaw, can we just go back a little
Certainly.
in Mr. Barlow's statement?
Yeah.
And I appreciate, brother, that you say you have no memory of any of this event. If you go back to paragraph 12, it's apparent that Mr. Barlow is, with other members of the SRC, putting forward a motion to ask Brother Nangle to tell Brother Dowland to stop putting his hand down kids' pants. You see that, paragraph 12?
Yes.
He then says that there was discussion because the children thought they might get into trouble, but they thought the request was reasonable, and it was documented as a motion in the minute book.
Yes.
And then he says the minute book went to you.
I never saw the minute book.
You never ever saw the minute book
No.
of any meeting.
If a minute book existed, I never saw it.
So he's got that wrong, has he?
I believe he has.
And then he goes on to describe the events which ultimately result in, he says, the request for him to tell the school what it said you told him to say. You understand that?
I understand that.
Now, your lack of recollection leaves us with his account of a complex sequence of events resulting in his public statement to the school, correct?
Yes.
If we accept his account, it's crystal clear, isn't it, that you knew that there was a belief amongst the boys of a serious problem with Brother Dowland's behaviour in relation to children.
If that information ever came to me, yes. But I don't believe that information did come to me.
Well, we've been through it. He gives a detailed account of what you did and what he was required to do, doesn't he?
Your Honour, with respect, since I have read this statement, discussed this matter with my lawyers, and I have told them that to the best of my memory, the Student Representative Council was managed exclusively and entirely by the prefect body, and Mr. Dowland's recollection of, Mr. Barlow's recollection of me being told something would have gone to the prefect body, and the prefect body then, if they chose, would have passed it on to me. And I never received that. I never heard that.
Well, we can put that to one side, but he goes on to talk of a detailed engagement with you and of the requirement that he make a statement to the school assembly, doesn't he?
Again, I have no memory of meeting with Mr. Barlow and talking to him.
We understand that. All I'm putting to you is that if we accept his account, it is crystal clear that you knew there was a problem with Brother Dowland's behaviour with children.
Yes, the answer to that would have to be yes.
Yeah.
Come on, please. So, to return to where we started, Brother Nangle, the Catechism. If, as has been suggested, and as you seem to have agreed, at least hypothetically, that you knew that Brother Dowland was, or might have been, sexually abusing and physically abusing the children at the school where you were the headmaster, that meant there was at least a chance that he was breaching this part of the Catechism, which says that the offence is compounded by the scandalous harm done to the physical and moral integrity of the young, who will remain scarred by it all their lives. Okay? So if there's the slightest chance of that occurring on your watch, you should have done something about it, shouldn't you?
And with respect, I would have had I known, and I did when I knew.
You've said hypothetically that given the facts as that have been presented to you during my cross-examination, that you probably, therefore, must have known.
I don't accept that.
All right. Am I correct in saying you did accept that just a minute ago when His Honour asked you a number of questions?
His Honour had a big if in front of it. If it happened, then I would have to say yes.
All right. And following that hypothesis through a little bit, if that was the case, if there was even perhaps a suggestion that something like this was going on with Dowland and your boys, even a suggestion, it's incumbent upon you to do something about it, isn't it?
If I was aware of it, I would have. And when I was aware of it, I did.
No more questions, thank you.
Mr Gray, I think it's your turn. How long will you be?
Well, I'll try to do it in about 10 minutes, Your Honour. That's my objective. I'm not sure I'll manage that.
Well, I'm just conscious of the fact that it's been a long day.
Has been a long day.
The brother's been in the box all day, but why don't you see if you can confine it to 10 minutes?
Brother, as you know, my name is Gray, and
The microphone's probably not doing too well.
can you hear me, brother?
Yes, okay.
I'm more worried about the people listening to you elsewhere.
Well,
Can we put some books underneath it
I have to do
so
that.
you can lift the microphone up?
No, they're not mine. Yes, but I don't use those, so maybe use those ones there. Is that better from the point of view of the
Yeah.
courtroom? Brother, as you know, my name is Gray, and I appear for the Truth, Justice and Healing Council and, relevantly for present purposes, the Christian Brothers and the Diocese of Ballarat. I think you know that. I'm only going to ask you about a small number of the topics that you've been asked about today. The first of them is BWG, who is who was the boy in respect of whom Dowland told you that he had engaged in excessive corporal punishment. You recall that?
Yes.
And this morning you were shown, and I think you may have been shown it again later, a police interview with BWG's mother, where, among other things, she referred to the belt buckle and so on. Remember that document?
Yes.
And you said you didn't know about that until you saw that document today.
Yes, that's true.
Now, in that interview, BWG's mother asserts that you visited BWG's house with Dowland and with somebody called, or that she refers to as Brother Davies, and with a police officer. Do you remember that she said that in that interview?
Yes.
Now, I wonder if we could turn to paragraph 92 of Brother Nangle's statement, please. You see, in that paragraph of your statement, you refer to a police statement that had been made by BWG himself, not his mother. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you note that BWG had referred in his statement to the police to your supposedly going to his home along with Dowland and a police officer. See that?
Yes.
And your evidence in your statement is, I am sure that I did not do so. Does that continue to be your evidence?
Yes.
And you go on in your statement, paragraph 92, the only meeting that I had with BWG's mother occurred at the brothers' residence, and the two of us were the only people at that meeting. Does that continue to be your recollection?
Yes, that's what happened.
And is your recollection in relation to those two things, that is, you never went to BWG's home and the only meeting that you had with his mother was in the brothers' residence, is that something that you remember or merely something that you think happened?
No, I remember that well.
Thank you. The second matter now, brother, different matter, is this. I'll try to do it in a compendious way. You've set out in your statement your recollection with respect to receiving complaints about a number of brothers. Firstly, Fitzgerald, the complaint about kissing. You remember saying that in your statement?
Yes.
Secondly, BMX, the complaint from the lay teacher about BMX engaging in something that the lay teacher thought was clearly sexual with the two boys on a bed.
Yes.
BWX, I beg your pardon. And thirdly, Farrell, your recollection of receiving a complaint from a parent. One complaint.
Yes.
And in your statement, you have given evidence that in each of those three cases, Fitzgerald and BWX and Farrell, as soon as you received the information about the kind of conduct that you recall being told, you immediately reported it in each of those cases to the provincial.
Yes.
Now, as to Dowland, counsel assisting took you today, and to some extent other counsel have as well, to evidence from a number of people as to their memory of various things being said to you about Dowland. You're aware of that?
Yes.
And so, among others, you've been taken to what Mr. Clarkson has said about a meeting with his mother in the O'Malley wing.
Yes.
You've been taken to what Mr. Barlow says about the SRC and the school assembly.
Yes.
And you've been taken to what a teacher, Mr. Holloway, said in a statement to police some time back.
Yes.
And you have responded in writing in your statement to each of those, haven't you?
Yes.
And in each of those cases, in your statement, your evidence is that if you had been made aware of each of those things that those people say you were made aware of, you would have reported it to the provincial.
Yes, certainly.
And is that still the evidence that you give?
Yes, very much so.
Next topic, brother, moving to a different topic altogether. You were taken by counsel assisting, and again to some extent also by others, to the interview with Howard Harrison, which is at tab 299 of the tender bundle. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
And in relation to Fitzgerald, that interview record contains the two sentences that you've been asked quite a bit about, namely, but in my time there was never any suggestion of improper conduct, never. It never arose and I was never aware of it. Remember, you've been asked about that?
Yes.
Now, could we please have tender bundle 150 on the screen? You see that that's a statement by you 18 years before the interview with Howard Harrison, namely in March 1996.
Yes.
And I understand that's a statement that you gave to Mr. Gamble, who was a solicitor acting in the interests of the Christian Brothers. Is that your memory?
Yes.
And at paragraph 4, well, in fact, before I go to that, do you see in the line just above paragraph 1, you say, in my time at the college I received some allegations and complaints as follows.
I'm sorry, I'm not with you.
Just above the paragraph numbered 1, there's an introductory line.
Yes, I see that.
It says, in my time at the college I received some allegations and complaints as follows.
Yes.
And paragraph 4 is you telling Mr. Gamble about a brother kissing the children in an inappropriate way. And that was Fitzgerald, wasn't it?
Yes.
And telling Mr. Gamble that you contacted the Provincial Council, that Brother Norton came, and that in due course the brother resigned and retired from the school.
Yes.
And then, secondly, if we could have tender bundle 280, please, 280.
Can I just raise an objection, Your Honour? It's more a point of clarification. It's a matter entirely for council. But who Gamble was representing in relation to what proceedings is important in terms of putting this and the next set of questions to this witness. You see, the allegations against Fitzgerald, who I note was not named in that, but just clarified by a leading question, did not come to light until around about the time of the interview in tab 299. Gamble was not dealing with complaints made by then children in relation to Fitzgerald in 1996. That needs to be put in clarification, otherwise it is fundamentally misleading.
Well, no doubt you can make a submission to that effect in due course.
As I said, it's a matter for council to clarify.
Unless Mr Gray deals with it. You understand what's being said, Mr Gray?
I've heard it, Your Honour, but I'm simply dealing with what's in the tender bundle.
Well, very well, but I do think there's a logic to what's been said, and if you don't deal with it, then no doubt a submission will be made.
Well, I may be able to deal with it, but not through this witness, Your Honour.
Well, it's a matter for you.
Yes, thank you. What's the... Now, tender bundle 280, if you have the heading to that, do you see that's an interview, another interview, this time in November 2008 between you and Mr Gamble?
Yes.
The heading is claimed by Peter Blenkiron.
Yes.
I wanted to take you to I've lost it again. Eh? Page 12. Yes, if I could take you to page 12. Do you see about just above halfway down the page, Mr. Mr. Gamble, who's referred to as Paul, raises Brother Fitzgerald with you? He asks Brother Fitzgerald, ?
Yes.
And he asks you, did you ever have any reason to suspect that they, referring there to Fitzgerald at least, had engaged in sexual abuse of boys? And you say, no, not at all. Do you see that?
Yes.
Question from him, had you ever received a complaint? And your answer is against Fitzgerald, and then you go on to describe Fitzgerald as being the one that was kissing the boys when they were going home. He was the only one, and I acted on that complaint. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you go on to say that you went straight to the Provincial and made your report and action was taken. See that?
Yes.
Now, when you spoke to Howard Harrison 6 years later, in 2014, was it your understanding that both he, Mr. Harrison, and you were conscious of what you had already referred to twice in those two previous interviews?
Yes, I think so.
Next topic, different topic. I think about the second or third last one. You were asked questions about CCD, who is the witness who gave evidence this morning, at the very start of today, about a complaint about Farrell, and CCD gave evidence, and I'm summarising it, that he and his mother came to the brother's residence and passed that complaint on to you there personally. Remember he said that?
Yes.
Now, you've given evidence in your statement that you did receive a complaint about Farrell, and it was only shortly after that that Farrell left both the school and the community.
Yes.
And you've given evidence that you think that the complaint that you received in that regard was one that came to you by a telephone call.
Yes. Yes.
And you said this morning, that's how I remember it now, namely that it was a telephone call.
Yes.
Now, is it possible that the complaint that CCD is talking about, and which he says was made not in a phone call but personally to you, was the very complaint that you remember receiving about Farrell?
I would be inclined to think that that is so, that is right.
And is one reason why you think that you do have a definite memory of only ever receiving one complaint about Farrell?
I only ever received one complaint about Farrell.
And it was a complaint received at a time which was followed only very shortly afterwards by him leaving the college, leaving the community.
That's right.
Now, I did be given the Age article. You were asked about the proposed letter, or the letter that you drafted for sending in response to an article in the Age.
Yes.
And your letter is dated July 2002. It's Tender Bundle 230. Can I show you a document, namely an Age article, and ask you whether you're able to say, to the best of your recollection, is this the article that you read, which your letter was going to respond to?
Thank you.
Are you able to say whether that's the article that your letter was responding to?
If the dates are congruent, I would think that that's quite likely.
I'm instructed that the date of this article, which we can check, but my instructions are that the date of the article was 22 June 2002.
Yes.
And your draft letter is dated the 7th of July, about, say, 2 weeks later or so.
So it's quite likely, yes.
And the reference to you in that article and to what I referred to as, quote, the St Patrick's years, close quote, is in the last column, the 5th column, is that right?
Yes.
And you were still in Fiji at this time, June, July 2002.
Yes.
Where you had been, with one or two exceptions, since 1980.
Yes.
So I tender that article.
It'll be Exhibit 28143.
Now, only a couple more things, brother. This afternoon, there were some questions from Dr. Hanscom sitting in front of me. And some of them were to do with the question of whether or not you had authority to cause a teacher to be removed from a school. Do you remember that territory?
Yes.
And one of the questions, perhaps more than one, suggested that you could recommend to the provincial that a teacher be removed. Remember that suggestion being part of one or more questions?
I was speaking about a brother being moved.
A brother?
Yes.
Yes. Now, in the case of brother BWX, as you've given evidence, the provincial did remove brother BWX after you had told the provincial of the complaint you had received.
Yes.
Was that removal of BWX by the provincial the result of any recommendation for removal from you?
I didn't make that recommendation. I made the report, and it was his decision entirely to take the brother away.
Did you ever have occasion in your years at Ballarat as the superior or the headmaster to recommend that any brother be removed from the school or a school?
No, I don't believe I ever did that.
Next, second last topic. In Mr. O'Brien's questions, which went for an hour or so this afternoon, one of the topics that he raised with you was again Brother Fitzgerald, and he referred to the topic of what he put to you as the policeman father, that is the father of the boy who was speaking to you, being a policeman, referring to the possibility of going to the police. Remember Mr. O'Brien putting that?
Yes.
And you accepted that from him. Could we have paragraph 45 of Brother Nangle's statement, please, on the screen? In that part of your statement, Brother Nangle, you are dealing with the topic of Fitzgerald and this complaint by the father about the kissing. And in paragraph 45 you say, in your statement, I don't recall having any further discussion with the parent who had contacted me. I had the impression that he was not expecting me to come back to him about the matter, but simply wanted me to address what was happening. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that your recollection of how the parent left it with you?
Yes, that's my memory of it.
And finally, brother, in the course of Mr. Shaw's questions in the last 3/4 of an hour or so, he went through with you some of the paragraphs in Mr. Barlow's statement. Do you remember that, about the SRC and so on?
Yes.
And he put to you in various ways several times something like this: if Mr. Barlow was truthful and reliable, then it must follow that you were told these things that Mr. Barlow refers to. Remember him putting that? And you, on 2 or 3 occasions, said something like, it's possible that there is another explanation.
Yes.
Remember saying that?
Yes.
Could I ask, what is the other possible explanation that you have in mind?
What I would have liked to have developed was that, as headmaster, I wish to cultivate a sense of responsibility throughout the school. I divided the college up into 3 sections and appointed a member of staff to take responsibility of each section in matters such as day-to-day arrangements, staff necessities, and matters of discipline. I was trying to encourage the staff not to send matters to me every time. What I would have liked to have explained was that I think it's possible that the Student Representative Council was given to the prefects to organise. No staff member attended their meetings. They were organised and managed by the prefects. And any recommendation coming from any matter arising from a student would have been in the hands of the prefects, who either handled the matter themselves or, I suppose, would have brought the matter on to me. What I would have liked to have said today was that I never received the complaint that Mr. Barlow said that he raised at the Student Representative Council, and it's possible that he did raise it, that it went to the prefect body and they elected either to do something themselves and not to involve me in it. To the best of my recollections too, I wanted to add today that on no occasion did I ever cite minutes of meetings. They were not, as it were, automatically forwarded to me. I never saw them.
Brother Nangle, in your responses to Mr. Gray, and it was true of the response you just made, you expressed a firm lack of an event having occurred as opposed to a lack of recollection of it having occurred. Do you understand?
Your Honour, I'm not sure that...
I'd understood you to say that you have no recollection of what Mr. Barlow had to say. Is that right?
Yes.
That was your evidence when I was talking to you.
Yes.
You just told Mr. Gray it didn't happen.
I'm very sorry, I'm lost.
Well, you just told Mr. Gray that you never received the complaint.
The minutes.
Whereas you previously have said you had no recollection.
The minutes, I think, Your Honour.
Well, the complaint.
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Well, what I'm asking you is this. We could go back through the transcript, but you've constantly said during the course of your evidence that in relation to events which are put as events that you were involved, which may speak against your actions, you've said you don't recollect.
You're referring to the specific...
Let's take this event, yes.
Yes, that's right.
You're saying you don't recollect it.
I don't recollect, yes.
You don't recollect getting the minutes, you don't recollect the complaint, you don't recollect the assembly, you don't recollect Mr. Barlow speaking at the assembly and so on.
That's true.
Right. But your evidence is not that those events didn't happen, as I understand it, you just don't recollect them.
Yes.
But without wishing to cavil on that, but so that I'm
You
clear.
don't have to cavil. It's an important question, Mr. Gray,
Not
because
disputing that, Your Honour.
you've put a number of questions to him and led answers from him,
Yeah.
where he's appeared to give a firm response
In a
rather
couple of
than saying
respects,
no
yes.
recollection. But his evidence throughout the day, most of the days, it's just been he doesn't recall these things.
Well, the two that I have put with great respect are the visit to Mr DWG's home, in respect of which he has always said, and he has reiterated, that it didn't happen. That's what his statement says, and he's confirmed that. In the case of this SRC, what Brother Nangle is, as I hear him, but he can correct me if I've not understood this, is that his recollection is never having seen minutes of the SRC, including any such minute on this topic.
But Mr. Barlow's evidence goes way beyond.
It may do,
That matter.
but that's all I've asked him about, with great respect.
All right. And the evidence is that you do have a recollection of not receiving it, is that right?
Yes.
As opposed to having no recollection one way or the other. Is that right?
Thank you.
Any
Nothing
questions?
arising, Your Honour.
Nothing arising? Very well. Thank you, brother. Thank you. I know it's been a long day, but thank you. That concludes your evidence. You are now excused. And we'll adjourn until 10 in the morning.
Yes, Your Honour.